afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our webinar on recent developments in corporate and international taxation. So till now, we have been conducting webinar primarily on indirect tax issues. So for this webinar, we have partnered with SIR Consulting LLP. So we have Rahul Garg, managing partner of the firm, with us. Rahul has close to 14 years experience in large big fours and consulting firms, primarily in corporate and international taxation area. So for last 4 years, he runs his own firm, specializing more on the direct taxation side. And he serves one of India's largest technology IT companies. And other companies in diversified areas on corporate side. So the purpose of organizing this webinar was that recently there have been important changes on corporate and international taxation side. And many of our clients, so even though we practice in indirect taxation, we work closely with Rahul for direct tax part. Many of our clients approached us on some direct tax issues. So we thought that let's organize a webinar on such issues which industry is facing. So Rahul will be running this webinar now. And at the end of the webinar, we have a live Q&A in which you can ask your questions live. We'll unmute you and we'll be answering your questions. So over to you, Rahul.
Yeah, thanks Puneet for the introduction and setting up this webinar. So good afternoon, everyone. Right. So as Puneet already mentioned that there have been some important changes which have been made in the direct tax legislation. You can say in the last 2 years, it started, although it started somewhere in Finance Act 2018, but actually the real changes have been introduced from 2020 onwards. And you can say that COVID has also played an important role, right, pertaining to these changes, because it has impacted government revenue, right, a lot, because business has been impacted significantly because of COVID, right? So you can say that this is the reason, this is one of the primary reason that some of these changes have been, you can say, preponed, right, by the government to have an immediate collection on the revenue side, right? Well, ultimately government has to run the country, right? So very briefly, we would be covering 4 topics in this webinar in the next 40-45 minutes, okay? In the next 40-45 minutes, and then we will be having the live Q&A session, okay? So I'll be spending more time on the first 2, basically the equalization levy, the enhanced version of equalization levy, and the second topic, which is the significant economic presence, which we normally, basically the terminology which we use is the new nexus rule, okay? Then on the 3rd and 4th, we will definitely touch base with some of the key aspects in relation to these topics as well, right? So considering the time basically constraint, let me just begin with the equalization levy 2.0. So very briefly, I'll be just giving you a very brief background on what was the genesis, okay, of the introduction of equalization levy. So as you are aware, almost everyone is aware that business models have evolved a lot in the last 1 decade, right? Where you can say typically the taxable presence which was linked to the physical presence, right, of a overseas organization in India is no more a critical factor for that overseas business basically organization, right, to run their activities in India. But because the existing domestic legislation of India, and you can say the treaties also, the tax treaties which India has entered with various countries, more or less these legislations are driven by the physical presence, right, of those overseas organizations in India to establish their taxable presence in India, where you can say India gets a right to tax basically the revenue which these organizations are generating from Indian customers. So you can say source is in India, right? Which we say source route, right? So, but as I mentioned, because businesses have been evolved a lot, and a lot of companies have started generating good revenue from Indian customers, right? Despite that, they do not have any physical presence in India. So, and one biggest example I can immediately take is Amazon, right? So Amazon, if you say, while a lot of people like us, right, have now started doing good purchases from platforms like Amazon, right? And in fact, that business has grown tremendously during this COVID period, okay, where normal brick and mortar, right, was severely impacted and businesses were closed. But yet online activity has increased tremendously, okay. So because of this, the revenue of the government has impacted, because a lot of these companies do not have any physical presence in India, right? So it is a challenge for the government like India, or you can say other developing countries, uh, to tax basically the revenue which these platforms are generating out of this basically these activities, okay. So the genesis was that because of these challenges which territories like India is facing to tax the revenue which these companies are generating. So and which we call as base erosion profit shifting, where the base is in India, right, but they are eroding that base and basically getting the tax free revenue from our basically source countries, okay. So then agenda has started basically somewhere around 2000, in the starting of, you can say, 2000, 2000 or 2001, where G20 has basically came together, and they have set up an agenda at OECD level, where they have basically defined goals, right, to mitigate such challenges, and how to basically to decide how they basically make the modifications in the existing domestic legislations and the tax treaties, okay, so that the modified legislations are able to tackle, right, this problem of revenue, basically revenue loss, okay. So we call it as a BEPS G20 agenda. So a lot of deliberations have happened between various countries, a lot of finance ministers have deliberated on these issues, and then the OECD has come up with 15 action plans, okay. Out of that action plan, the first action plan was action plan 1, which is related to, you can say, digital economy, okay. In that action plan, there were some recommendations which have been made by OECD. So there were basically, you can say, it is in two parts. One is action plan 1, you can say, the first version, and the second version is still in the drafting stage, which we call as pillar 1, pillar 2, okay. So the BEPS has recommended 2-3 measures which countries like India can adopt, right, to generate the immediate revenue, right, on a short-term basis, till the time a global consensus is reached between countries, where they set the rules again afresh, where the source country has the appropriate right to tax basically the revenue which these businesses are generating from countries like India. So equalization levy was one of that recommendation, which was recommended under action plan 1, and it was mentioned that countries can adopt this measure, right, even under the domestic legislation, right? But it was also mentioned that countries should basically should be mindful of their obligation under the tax treaties which they have entered with the different countries. So this was the basically background. Equalization levy in India was introduced in 2016 in a limited manner, right? And before that, government has also set up a committee, right, which has submitted a detailed report to the committee somewhere in February 2016, where they have laid down the plan of action for introduction of equalization levy for the next few years, right? Because consensus was, yeah, it was very much anticipated that, because the consensus to define the rules, the entire game of rules again to tax such kind of businesses, right, is a basically long discussion which is required, right, at between various countries. So that is why government has introduced equalization levy in 2016. Initially, EL was introduced to tax the revenue which these companies are generating from advertisements, okay, which Indian businesses are making through these platforms, whether it is Amazon, Facebook, okay. And the obligation was put on the payer, that the whosoever is basically posting ads on such platforms, then the payer of such revenue to these companies, because these companies do not have any physical presence in India, so payer of the revenue has to deduct equalization levy at the rate of 6%, okay, on the amount. And a condition was introduced in the law that if you don't deduct, right, such equalization levy, then the expense which you are incurring for in relation to those advertisements, that will not be allowed to you as a business deduction. So that was the first introduction, you can say, equalization levy, the first version, okay, which was introduced in 2016, right? But again, in a limited manner, and obligation was on the payer. Then in 2020, it was not part of the original finance bill, which was presented by the finance minister, right? But you can say, because in March, somewhere in the end of February or the starting of March, we had the lockdown because of COVID, right? So somewhere government had this concern that now they have to generate more revenue because businesses are impacted. So that is why in the later stage of the, basically you can say, enactment of the finance bill to the Finance Act, at that stage, government has introduced the provisions of equalization levy 2.0, right, where they have increased the scope of this equalization levy significantly. And they say that every e-commerce operator, right, who is providing e-commerce supply or services to either Indian residents, okay, and or to any non-resident who has a PE in India, then for all such e-commerce supply or services through that e-commerce platform, they have to pay 2% equalization levy on the entire consideration which they are receiving, right, from either sale of goods. So for example, if I take the example of Amazon, so Amazon does basically two transactions. One, they sell their own branded products on their platform, and the second is they facilitate, right, the third party sellers and the third party service providers. So it covers both. It says that any transaction which is resulting into sale of goods by the third party seller, where Amazon is facilitating the transaction, or where third party is providing a service where Amazon is facilitating that provision of service over their platform, or if Amazon is directly selling their own products, right, on that platform. In all these three scenarios, right, where you can say sale, provision of services, or facilitation, whatever is the scenario, whatever consideration Amazon is receiving out, right, from Indian customers in relation to these, under these scenarios, there Amazon has to pay 2% equalization levy to Indian government, okay. And there is a threshold which has been prescribed. There is a threshold which has been prescribed by the government for applicability of this enhanced version of equalization levy, and the threshold is very low, which is 2 CR, 20 million INR, right? Where if in the entire year, if your revenue or consideration from these transactions is up to 20 million INR, then equalization levy is not applicable on the transaction, right? This was the amendment made by Finance Act 2020, okay, and there were a lot of basically ambiguities in the original provisions which were introduced in Finance Act 2020, and people were seeking clarity that you say that consideration on the entire consideration. Now, if Amazon is just facilitating, so let's take an example where Amazon is just facilitating a third party seller, and I am purchaser, I am purchasing some product, say 1 lakh rupees, okay, and I'm making a payment to Amazon for that 1 lakh rupees, and Amazon is making, say, back-to-back payment of 95,000 rupees to a third-party seller for the same transaction. Now, whether Amazon needs to pay 2% equalization levy on the entire 1 lakh rupees or 5,000 rupees which they have earned as a commission, right? This was a major ambiguity in that provision, okay. So industry has approached the finance ministry to come back with some clarification so that industry can take an appropriate position, right, that on which transaction it is actually applicable and how should we compute the consideration on which equalization levy is payable, right? So, and there was one more ambiguity. So the way it is what it is, because equalization levies was introduced by Finance Act. It's not an income tax as per the government, right? Because if you make it as a part of domestic law, then it becomes income tax, and again treaty comes into the picture. India will still not be able to collect that equalization levy till the time the non-resident has a treaty protection, right? So that is why they have introduced this as a part of levy through Finance Act, saying it's not income tax. So that is the reason it is also not creditable to the non-resident, basically seller or service provider in their home jurisdiction. Okay. So there was an ambiguity. The law says that if if on a transaction with equalization levy is applicable, right, or payable, then that transaction is exempt under the normal provisions of Income Tax Act under Section 10, subsection 50. Okay. And because EL 2.0 was introduced with effect from 1st April 2020, but there was an ambiguity which remained in the provision under Section 10, subsection 50. When they made the corresponding amendment, they made it applicable from 1st April 2021. So people were in a fix, right? That if EL is applicable on a transaction from 1st April 2020, but exemption is applicable from 1st April 2021, right? Then on transactions such as royalty or FTS, right, where, for example, if you are downloading a software, or say if you are taking a technical service from a non-resident service provider, right, and you are deducting tax under the normal provisions of domestic law, withholding tax, say, at the rate of 10% under the domestic law. Now, because if this transaction comes within the ambit of equalization levy at the level of receiver of that income, because EL is on the receiver, then under section, because section 1050 says that it becomes exempt, then section 195, which talks about withholding tax under the domestic legislation, then do I need to stop my withholding, right? Because equalization levy is applicable on that transaction. But because of the ambiguity of the applicability, people were in a fix, right? Because there was no exemption that has been implemented from 1st April 2020. So it was a challenge for both receiver and payer, where receiver has started depositing equalization levy in 2%, and payer was continuing, right, applying withholding tax at the rate of, say, 10%, because they do not have, right, that savior of exemption, right, from 1st April 2020. So you can say government was collecting both 2% from the receiver and 10% at the level of payer. This was an ambiguity, right? This was also highlighted by a lot of industry bodies that this is an anomaly, right? But again, and everyone was expecting that government may basically remove this anomaly very soon, but unfortunately, it was not removed. Whether it was deliberate, whether government had that intention that we are not okay with collection of 2% against 10%, right? So in Finance Act 2021, we had series of amendments in Equalization Levy 2.0, and we just basically those amendments have basically increased those challenges multifold, right? Although government has removed that anomaly and made it applicable from 1st April 2020 only, but they had made a very, basically, you can say, significant change, because when equalization levy was introduced, so the basically the common understanding that has been developed was that once a transaction is liable for equalization levy, its characterization becomes irrelevant, right? Characterization means, if, for example, so for that, the same example which I have taken, that if I'm downloading a software, right, now if I'm making a payment, right, then whether it is a royalty or not, although, and we recently had a Supreme Court decision also, particularly on software taxation, leaving aside that, if I assume that it is royalty, right, but because the transaction is liable for equalization levy, right, then do I then should I deduct TDS at the rate of 10% or not, right? So government has made an amendment, very major amendment, and now it says that all transactions which are chargeable for royalty and FTS, those are outside of ambit of equalization. So the common understanding which has been evolved over a period of time, when 6% EL was introduced, that if you are making payment for ad related basically transactions, then some people, and there is a litigation also on this topic, that department takes a position that no, it is a payment for FTS or royalty in case of ad related payments also. But there was basically again there was a litigation where receiver says no, because I do not have any presence in India, so this is not royalty, and this is also not royalty FTS, right? So nothing is taxable in India. So to curb all these issues, EL was introduced so that government peacefully can collect at least 6%, right, without going into this litigation of basically royalty FTS, right? So common understanding which has been evolved was that once EL is applicable, you have to pay 6%, right, as a payer. leave aside royalty, FTS, right? Withholding provisions are not applicable because exempt, there is a specific exemption in the Income Tax Act. Now, because of these changes, right, where the provision says that if a transaction is chargeable to royalty and FTS, then it is out of equalization levy, right? Then it creates a lot of challenges, right? One is this issue, and I will just touch base very quickly what could be the potential issue. Second issue is when EL 2.0 was introduced in 2020, the provision says that any e-commerce operator who own, operate, or manage an e-commerce platform, right? An e-commerce platform is also defined. E-commerce platform is says that it is any online or electronic facility which works over the internet, very wide, right? And after that, it says that what is e-commerce supply or services which e-commerce operator is doing. E-commerce supply or services means any sale of goods owned by e-commerce operator, any provision of services provided, any services provided by e-commerce operator online, right? And facilitation. So the word used was sale, online sale. So people were basically, so when we were examining with our client that what is the implication, so implication was that both, so sale means there has to be an offer and there is a purchase, right? Acceptance, right? It has to be online, both these activities, right? So people were taking a view that if I am just raising a purchase order over an internal ERP to my intercompany, then it is just a one side of online transaction, right? Where I'm just raising a purchase order. Otherwise, acceptance is not online, okay? And delivery is the physical delivery of goods. So it means the sale is not concluded online over on an overall basis. Hence, the transaction is not liable to equalization levy. Now, government has come up, right, with a very major, you can say, amendment in Finance Act 2021. It says that it can be treated as an online sale if any of the following activities, right, is happening online. And what it says, right, I'll just read because it is important, right? It says that online can be any one or more of the following online activities, which is either acceptance of offer for sale, placing of purchase order, acceptance of purchase order, payment of consideration, which is, this payment of consideration again is basically still not clear that what does they want to cover in this. And then the last one is supply of goods or provision of services partly or wholly. So if any of this activity is happening online, you can say sale is concluded online and you are chargeable to equalization levy. Now, see, now in case of a cross-border transaction where obviously equalization levy apply, it has to be an online payment. If everything is basically right, if everything is happening offline, say raising of purchase order, if I'm suppose sending a purchase order over email now, and let's take an example, very quick example. There is a US company, they have a subsidiary in India, right? And the subsidiary is into trading of goods. They purchase the goods from the US holding company and sell in India. They have an internal ERP, right? Where the process is that whenever the Indian company requires the goods, they need to raise a purchase order on that ERP, right? And then the holding company in US, they will accept that purchase order on the same system. Once the basically transaction concludes, after the acceptance basically by the holding company, then they will deliver the goods physically. Now, first of all, whether this, now there are multiple questions which basically crops up out of this transaction. First of all, whether the US company will be treated as a e-commerce operator. This ERP, typically these ERPs are generally licensed software from third party. So first of all, can we say that the US company is the owner, operator, or manager of that ERP? First of all, because the first condition is that the receiver, right, or the seller of goods has to be an e-commerce operator. So first of all, you need to tick that box whether the US company is an e-commerce operator. Now, if the transaction, if say if along with this example, if I say send the purchase order over email, and email, say I have taken the subscription from say Microsoft, Google, right? I'm using an email, right, of these companies, and I am raising a purchase order, sending a purchase order over email, and I am also getting a confirmation over email from my holding company. Okay, we accept, we will deliver. Now, can you say that the email service, yeah, right, whether that email service first of all is a e-commerce platform or not, right? whether that email surveys, basically the raising of purchase order or acceptance of purchase order, right, by these two companies, can we say that this is a transaction which get concluded on the e-commerce platform? Now, if I'm just making online payment, which has to be online under this transaction, so can it fall under these wider provisions? So you can say the intention was, so I'm just giving these examples, right, because it is creating a lot of ambiguities, right, for traditional imports also, right, because the idea was different. The idea was to cover those kind of businesses who are completely digital, where they do not have any presence in India. Transactions are getting executed completely over online platforms like Amazon, but it should not cover transactions where it is related to traditional imports, like, as I mentioned, transactions through internal ERPs, right? So, but because of these provisions, it is creating a lot of challenges for the industry to take an appropriate view on these payments. Now, if we say this transaction in case of purchase of goods, now non-resident has to decide whether they need to pay equalization levy at the rate of 2% on the sale of goods, because it may fall under these vital provisions of equalization levy, right? This is one. Now, on the service side, it is altogether more challenging, right? Service side, or you can say other transactions which are related to tech sector. So you can these days uh, you mostly purchase softwares or take services online, right? Where you download the keys and then download the software. Those days are gone. Uh, Say in 1990s or 2000, where you receive the key in a box of Shankar software, and then you start save those softwares on your laptop or desktop through those keys. These days you just get a license online, right? You just get the key and then you download the software from the website of that particular software provider and save on your desktop, right? Now, in such transactions, it is altogether a challenge to determine whether the payment which Indian customer is making to these basically service providers, or you can say software providers, whether this is royalty or FTS or not, right? After in addition of these change, after making of these changes, where they say that if transaction is liable for royalty or FTS, then these transactions are out of equalization levy. Now it creates challenges for both payer as well as the receiver. How? So if I purchase the software, first of all, I need to decide whether royalty provisions are applicable on these payments or not, right? And on the payer side, now on the receiver side, if receiver takes a position, no, it is not royalty under the domestic law or the income tax treaty, right? Then then the non-resident needs to pay equalization levy at the rate of 2% on such transaction. Now, it is creating a challenge for both payer as well as the receiver to take appropriate call, whether they need to pay equalization levy on that particular payment, or the payer needs to deduct tax under section 195, or say domestic provisions of income tax act. So, because see, if payer does not deduct tax, then they have their independent adverse consequences under the domestic law. If you're liable to deduct tax and basically on any royalty or FTS related payment, and if you don't deduct, then government has full right that they can initiate proceedings under section 201 of income tax act to recover those taxes from you. They can even disallow your entire expense. Okay, so these are the challenges, right, which now government has created for the payers also after this amendment, because now characterization has altogether become relevant after this amendment by 2021. So these are the challenges basically which basically industry needs to take care while taking an appropriate view within the group, right? So if it is an intercompany transaction, they need to examine these provisions carefully and then take a call whether receiver needs to pay equalization levy, because if you're paying equalization levy, it's not just payment, you have to file the equalization levy return also. They can scrutinize your equalization levy return. Similarly, on the payer side, if I don't deduct, I am running the consequence of disallowance of my deduction, or say recovery of payment, or even penalty as well as prosecution as well under the withholding tax provisions, which are independent provisions for payers, right? So these are the few challenges which this equalization levy 2.0, right, have created for both payers as well as receivers. As an immediate next step, right, I think what industry can do, first of all, you need to examine whether it is an implication for the payer or the receiver. And then there are other basically challenges also, right? Which how what is the meaning of consideration, right? As I mentioned, that whether consideration, whether I need to pay equalization levy on the commission part or on the entire consideration which a platform or you can say seller is receiving. So these are the immediate basically action items for the industry, right, which they need to take care while implementing these provisions of equalization levy across the. Now, the second important amendment which has been made, these are again related to Action Plan 1, because this is the, you can say, second recommendation in the Action Plan 1, that although equalization levy provision was temporary, and that's why it was introduced through Finance Act. Okay. Significant economic presence was a, you can say, a primary provision, right, or you can say permanent provision to establish a new nexus rule. So right now, the way our income tax law is structured, that whosoever non-resident has a taxable presence, so as a physical presence in India, either by way of an office, right, or by way of an agent, right, then you can say that they have a business connection in India, because it is their taxable presence is linked to their business connection. Section 9 subsection 1 is the basically relevant provision in this case. And if the non-resident establishes business connection in India, then the question comes with basically what is the income which is attributable to that business connection or their operations in India, that India has a right to tax, right, as a source country. Now, as I mentioned that there are a lot of businesses who do not need such kind of physical presence in India. That's why a permanent solution was required, right? Because the existing provisions are not capable enough, right, to tackle such kind of businesses. Hence, you can say a new nexus rule has been introduced by Finance Act 2018, right? And it says that any transaction that non-resident has with any person in India, okay, in relation to provision of sale of goods, provision of services, okay, any such transaction, if that non-resident is undertaking with any person in India, then it is establishing basically his significant economic presence in India, and it is a deemed business connection, right, for that non-resident in India. So basically, they have introduced a fiction under the domestic law, where even if you do not have any physical presence in India, but if you are just having a transaction with a person in India, while your all the entire operations are outside of India, still you will be having a business connection in India in the form of SEP, right? And then once SEP triggers, right, then again you are within the ambit of the Indian Income Tax Act. Now, while the treaty protection is still there, right? Because the the existing tax treaties are still driven by the physical presence requirement, right, in the form of permanent establishment, right, to constitute to basically to you can say to trigger a taxable presence of that non-resident in India, but it is not automatic, right? So treaty protection is not automatic. So if, for example, if a person is, if an Indian company, on the same example between holding and subsidiary, right, in the interest of time, if Indian company is purchasing goods, physical goods from their foreign company, then uh, for and that there is a threshold that if the transaction of that non-resident with the Indian buyer is more than 2 CR in the entire financial year, then SEP will trigger. Now, because this threshold is too low, right? Hence, in most of the cases, in case of import, SEP will trigger. Now, if SEP triggers, then what is the next step, right? Next step is the Indian payer has to, it puts an obligation on the Indian payer from a withholding tax side, right? While there are some obligations on the non-resident as well, which I'll be covering later. But from a payer standpoint, if there is a SEP that gets triggered for a particular transaction, that the income becomes taxable under the domestic law. Now, Section 90 subsection 4 of under our Income Tax Act says that if you can give, you can, as a payer, you can grant beneficial provisions of the tax treaty to a non-resident if you obtain certain specified documents from that non-resident. What are those documents? Document is you need to take TRC, tax residency certificate, of that non-resident in your records, right? And this TRC is not an internal document of the company. They need to approach the IRS, tax revenue or tax authorities of their country, and through by way of an application, and then the revenue authorities will issue a TRC to you that you are the tax resident of that particular country. Hence, you are eligible to claim the beneficial provisions of tax treaty. Typically, it is covered by Article 4 of each treaty, where it says that you need to be a basically uh, fiscal resident, right, of that home country, if you are basically, if you want to explore the beneficial provisions of tax treaty. So you need the TRC of that person. You need a no PE declaration of that person, that you do not, while you are having a SEP under the domestic law, you do not have any other physical presence in India which may create a permanent establishment under the treaty for you. So you need a declaration from a strong declaration from that non-resident. And the third item is Form 10F. This is also prescribed from under the Indian domestic law, right? Where it has some details which are normally not available under the TRC, which each tax authority issue, right, to a particular non-resident. Once you have all these three documentation, and again, when you take this documentation, you need to check whether this TRC is appropriate, because TRCs also have different formats. For example, if you say US TRC, right, it only says tax year 2021. Now, if your transaction is, but we follow financial year. If your transaction is running, basically, you are recognizing a payment on say January, somewhere in January 2022, but you have a TRC of 2021, then it will not work. You need to have a fresh TRC, right? Similarly, you need to basically scan the TRCs, because in other countries you have different entity structures. Okay. For example, in India, we do not have that concept of fiscally transparent entities, where where the entity per se is not taxable in the domestic provisions of that particular country, but the owners of that particular entity. So typically, many times, Indian authorities have taken a position in the past that if the non-resident is a fiscally transparent entity, then that fiscally transparent entity is not eligible for treaty protection. If you have such kind of scenario, then despite that you have a TRC, right, you may not be able to give the benefit of tax treaty to that particular non-resident. So you have such kind of complications as a payer. If you don't do, then what is the consequence? If you don't collate such kind of document, you are running. So 3rd May 2021 is the date when Indian government has basically prescribed the threshold for implementation of significant economic presence provisions, where the threshold is that, as I mentioned, if the revenue is more than 2 CR, right, of that non-resident, then SEP triggers. And there is another threshold which is hardcore to the tech sector companies, where it says that if you have a more than 3 lakh users, right, then SEP can trigger in India, right? Irrespective. So first week is a revenue linked condition. Second is the user linked condition. I am right now more focusing on the revenue linked condition. So if SEP triggers, you don't need to take these documentation. From 3rd May 2021 onwards, you are running a risk of entire disallowance of your purchases during your assessments, right? Because if treaty protection is not there, income is taxable under domestic law. There is no mechanism which is prescribed in the existing domestic law how you attribute the income which is taxable in India, particularly for non-residents. So as a payer, I do not have any avenue to examine what is the income within that transaction which is taxable, on which I need to apply TDS. So the safer option is, if you don't have such documentation, either you apply 40% tax plus surcharge cess, somewhere around 43%, or you have a risk of disallowance of your entire purchases, right? Department can collect that 43% tax also from the Indian payer under Section 201 of Income Tax Act. So these are the complications, right, which these provisions have triggered for payers, right? And on the receiver side, now if we say on the receiver side, what are the challenges? So receiver also needs to take an independent call, right? That if SEP is triggered, right? So do they need to file income tax return in India? Because once income tax return is fine. So at least in my experience, I have seen that generally big multinational groups are very mindful of filing of income tax return, because many times I have seen that if they have say 1 or 2% extra tax impact, under Indian territory, they live with it, but they avoid filing income tax return in India because they generally try to avoid additional compliance. And obviously, once income tax return is filed, then you are within the ambit of tax authorities. You are open for scrutiny also and everything, right? So that is an independent call which which non-resident entities need to take, right? So again, as a group, right, where they have a subsidiary in India and there is a transaction between holding subsidiary, so such kind of, basically these are the kind of issues which as a group they need to take a call from the payer side as well as the receiver side, because there are still a lot of ambiguities under the provisions of SEP that for non-resident how much income it is going to be taxed. Because under the existing business connection provision is clear that if you have a business connection, that income which is attributable to that operation or business connection will only be taxed. Because if Amazon, for example, has a business activity because of SEP in India, then Amazon has their operations in US as well, right? So whatever income they are generating, say if they are generating 1,000 rupees on a particular transaction, then obviously they are having infrastructure operations in both these countries. How much amount India has a right to tax? How much amount US has a right to tax? There is no mechanism that is provided in the existing provisions of SEP. So these are the issues, right, which need immediate attention of multinational groups, right, while they implement such provisions, right, on the, at least on the traditional imports. While they are having, we have other issues also because of SEP. Because see, SEP also says that if non-resident is providing service to a person in India, then SEP triggers. Now, if the same transaction is covered under the gross basis taxation also, if I'm say downloading a software, right, again, then the software company may be having an SEP in India. Similarly, the software company may be having a applicability of equalization levy 2.0 also on that particular transaction. And the third challenge is payer may say that it is royalty. Then they need to tax 10% withholding tax also under gross basis taxation. So what call you should take? Are you liable? So on the receiver and payer side, what provisions need to be followed? SEP, equalization levy, or gross basis taxation. So these are the kind of challenges, right, with which we have, where we have a lot of ambiguities while implementing such provisions.
So Rahul, actually we are running short of time.
Yeah.
So maybe if you can cover next two topics quickly.
Yeah.
And then we can come to Q&A also.
Sure.
Yeah.
So how much time?
5 minutes.
Yeah. So as I mentioned that I'll be spending maximum time on the first two topics because it has a lot of background also. Dividend taxation per se, I'll be covering very quickly. So we had a previous dividend taxation regime where the payer company, right, the company who is distributing the dividend, they had to compute dividend distribution tax somewhere around 20%, 22%, and pay to the government, right? There was no implication in the hands of shareholder. Although we have some different issues under the previous regime also, where some companies have started exploring whether under the treaty, even in the previous regime, they can explore the refund of the excess amount, right, which is more than the rate which is prescribed under the treaty in case of a cross-border transaction. But leaving aside that, we are talking about the new regime of dividend taxation, which was introduced from Finance Act 2020. Now, under the new regime, the challenge was, so the reason for the change was, when a multinational is operating in India, right, then they have a corporate tax cost, right, while they are operating in India. But that corporate tax or cost, you can say somewhere it may be credited, some portion of it might be creditable in the home jurisdiction. DDT was more or less not a creditable amount for that non-resident shareholder, right, when they offer that income of dividend in their home country. So it was becoming a cost. So overall, the cost of that multinational group was coming more than 40% when they operate in India. So in the last 2-3 years, you can say government has simplified, right? Particularly on the cost structure, government has introduced 2-3 new provisions. They've introduced section 115 BAA, 115 BAB, where they have reduced the corporate tax significantly to 22.17%, sorry, 25.17% effective rate and 17%. Apart from that, to curb the challenge of this dividend taxation, right, where DDT was becoming a cost for multinationals, they have basically amended this entire regime where dividend is now again dividend has again now become taxable in the hands of shareholder. Now, what is the implication? Implication is once it is taxable in the hands of shareholders, particularly in case of non-resident shareholders, they have a treaty benefit also. So under the domestic law, you have you can say you have almost 20% rate, right? If I talk about cross-border payments, right, for taxation of that dividend in India under Part 2 of Finance Act first schedule, right? But if the treaty it says 10%, right, then you have a benefit, right? So first of all, whenever the company will pay dividend to the non-resident shareholder, they have to deduct TDS. So they have to see what are the beneficial provisions. Again, you have to collect all the documents to check whether they are eligible for the treaty benefit or not. These are the additional compliances which have been put on the payer in the new regime. But this will give a beneficial tax rate, you can say, to the non-resident shareholder when they receive dividend from Indian companies, right? So this is one. Secondly, because now it is becoming taxable, and this is income tax, which is covered by the treaty, non-resident can claim this tax, which is deducted in India on such dividend in their home jurisdiction also. So it may not become a cost to them, right, at all when they file their income tax return in their home jurisdiction. So that was the significant benefit which government wanted to achieve out of this new dividend regime. Apart from this, one more benefit which I want to highlight. Recently, few companies have approached high courts, like in cases like Concentric, Asian Paint, because in some treaties we have MFN clauses, right, which says that, for example, in case of France, India has entered a treaty with France, and if say it has a 10% withholding rate on dividend. Now, the protocol to the tax treaty says that if India, after the signing of India-France treaty, enters any treaty with any OECD country, right, with lesser scope, reduced scope, or reduced rate of tax, then that rate will be applicable from a withholding standpoint, right? There is a litigation on this issue, right? There is a judgment in case of Steria where more or less this issue has been settled, right? Because income tax authority says that to trigger MFN, there is a separate notification required by the Indian government, right? But taxpayers have approached High Court, and High Court has accepted the contention that protocol is also a part of the treaty. It is not a separate legislation, it is a part of the treaty. So if MFN is prescribed in the protocol, there is no need for specific notification to be issued by the Indian government, right, for triggering of that MFN clause, right? Hence, a lot of companies have started adopting the benefit of MFN, where, for example, if you see the Treaty of Colombia, it provides the tax rate of 5%, right? So if it is a, so say you if you are in treaties like Sweden, Netherlands, France, right, Mauritius in any ways has 5% rate. But if you are falling covered under such treaties, then you can explore the benefit of MFN also, MFN clause also, which is there in these treaties, and basically you can pull out the rate of 5% from other treaties to give the maximum benefit to your non-resident shareholders. Particularly, this is important when you have intercompany transactions, right? And one suggestion, normally we have litigation, so one option is you can make the entire payment. So from a withholding standpoint, you can deduct entire 20%, right? But you, in the return of income which non-resident files, they apply, basically they claim the benefit of MFN through this 5% rate and claim the refund. It will save you from litigation in two entities, payer and receiver, right? Then as a receiver, you can approach government for refund, and there is an option now, board for advance ruling, right? Although now law has been changed significantly, right, where you have revenue officer, senior revenue officer sitting in BAR, board for advance ruling, and it is under implementation. But it is available directly to High Court, right? So instead of basically having a normal course of litigation that you have a disallowance, right, you can say you have a negative decision from AO, assessing officer, then CIT appeal, then tribunal, and then High Court. It takes more than 10 years to reach High Court. So better you go for advance ruling if you feel that tax authorities at ground level, you can say field officer level, is not going to accept your argument, right? Better you approach BAR. Even if you get negative order, you are directly before the High Court. So this is one option which can be explored, particularly such kind of cases which are hardcore technical. Yes. Last two.
Yeah. Sure, maybe quickly.
Yeah. So the last topic which we wanted to cover is startups, right? Because startup is altogether a different ecosystem, right? There are few points which I want to highlight in case of startups, right? We have we have typically two kind of structures in startups. One is inverted structure, second is flip structure. Now, as an example, most of these cases, if I talk about Indian startups, you have generally Indian founders. Okay. Now, Indian founders, so generally Indian founders needs funding, right, for expansion. Now, initially they start their organization, say if they set up an Indian company in India with equal shareholding in that Indian company. Parallelly, they generally set up a overseas entity also, because typically typically the non-resident investors, right, like to invest in such jurisdictions like Singapore, US, right? So we have seen in our experience, and I will be just basically discussing that example, that we have seen normally when they set up such companies overseas in India, they generally follow a equal shareholding structure in both companies, right? But there is a challenge in that. Your FEMA comes into the picture in this, and FEMA has a specific restriction, right, where it says that if an Indian resident has a shareholding in a company overseas, then that foreign company cannot have a wholly owned subsidiary in India. So the challenge which comes is, if you set up such kind of structure initially, then because see, when you operate in such entity structure, generally India is a back office, and you have IP, or you can say your technology sitting in your overseas entity. When you have Indian entity as a back office and wholly owns, it is a subsidiary of holding company which is based in Singapore, then your value gets consolidated at the Singapore level, because Singapore is the owner of that Indian company also, right? But if you have such parallel shareholding structure in two company, then FEMA comes into the picture, and then FEMA restricts you, right, to have that holding subsidiary structure, and it creates a lot of challenges for the value creation for the founders, because till the time you don't have that holding subsidiary structure, you may not be able to find the right investor in your holding company to invest in your overseas entity, right? So that is why we wanted to touch base with this topic, that this is something which startups need to be mindful of when they set up their entity structure, right? So this is the flip structure where founders are Indian, you have IP based overseas, and then you have back office in India. Similarly, you have inverted structure, where if you feel that you do not have any constraint, right, where you need investor only overseas, then you can make India holding overseas as a back office. Then we call it as an inverted structure. But typically we see that because most of the startups are in tech driven domain, right? So IP is basically a very important factor, right? When they set up their legal entity structure, or you can say transaction structure. Hence, it is altogether important that what is the structure which you are setting up in the initial phase, right, to have a best possible value creation in future. And apart from this legal entity structure, the transaction flow is also important. What is the model you are following between the transaction in the transaction between these two companies? Whether back office is having a license agreement with the overseas entity, or back office is having a marketing agreement, right? How you are distributing the revenue between these two entities? What is the TP model which you are following, transfer pricing model which you are following, right, in these two entities, so that each entity gets the right return to avoid any litigation either in the overseas jurisdiction or in the Indian jurisdiction, right? So typically we have seen such kind of issues, and normally startups basically set up legal entities either in Singapore or US, because Singapore has a very good treaty network, right? They have very flexible IP regime also. These are some of the factors. That is why startups mostly prefer flip structure route. But we thought we should highlight at least these factors, because once you set up, then your value creation start is very difficult to basically correct these structures, because once these structures set up, your reporting have been done. Now if you want to change your structures, RBI comes into the picture, and many times they don't allow you, because they restrict this because of round tripping provisions. Many times it happens that structural changes require even years. Hence it is important to take an appropriate call from the from the very first instance, when you are taking call on the legal entity structure as well as the transaction.
With this, we come to an end of this session, and we thank you for joining. And we'll come up with more such important and interesting topics in future. Yeah, thank you for joining.
Thanks everyone.